I've built something and now it's all like kind of in dust in my hands. And then certainly now as a coach, I hear very often from my clients or even people who are curious about coaching, they feel like they have either wasted time and are feeling a lot of regret and even shame around that, or they're worried that they are in the process of wasting, whether it's wasting their time, wasting their potential. Like, I know I can do so much more, and I just don't know where to channel it.
Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, your weekly inspiration for post-PhD career development. With me, David Mendez. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me from DC, or anyway, DC adjacent area, Ashley Jablow. Ashley is the founder of Wayfinders Collective, and she's the creator of Life Design School, a creative studio for people in career and life transition. Ashley is a seasoned facilitator, keynote speaker, coach, and design strategist, and she blends design thinking, emotional intelligence, and creative tools to spark clarity and action. She's also the artist and author of 100 Days of Designing My Life, a guided journal series for reflection and reinvention. Ashley, welcome on Beyond the Thesis. I'm super happy to have you here. And I told you before we started recording, this is a special day. The podcast has just been nominated in the Outstanding Education category for the Canadian Podcast Award. So special day, special episode.
Wow, I feel so lucky to get to share this special moment with you, David. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. It is. It's really cool. So, Ashley, let's talk about how you gravitated towards this domain and what were the steps. I know you have had experience in graduate school, but I'm not going to reveal anymore because you have things to share about that. So maybe share a little bit of your story, your journey with us, and then we'll go from there. And we'll talk about the 4 principles that you talk about. So just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I mean, I wish I could say, David, that I had a specific plan and I have just spent my career executing on that plan. I mean, I remember when I was in business school, I did a lot of informational interviews, and I would always ask people, typically, when you do an informational interview, you're meeting with people whose job you want, right? And so I would always ask, like, how did you get to where you are? Because secretly in my mind, I'm thinking, so I can follow the steps to get to where you are.
Yeah.
And without a doubt, people would answer, well, it didn't always make sense at the time, but one thing led to the next, which led to the next, which led to the next. And 20 years later, I can look with hindsight and see how it all fits together. And I used to find that answer so infuriating, if I'm really honest, because of course, we all want a plan. We all want to know just like, what are the steps to get there? And I hate to say it, but that is exactly what's true with me too. I really have not had a very clear plan for most of my career, but maybe a couple of things have always sort of guided me forward. So the first that I think of is I've always been very ambitious. I've always been a high achiever, maybe an overachiever. It's really mattered to me that I've been doing work and that I do work that has purpose for me personally, that has impact in the world in some shape or form. And admittedly, for many years, it was also very important to me that I did work with organizations that were reputable, that people recognized. I mean, my ego and the perfectionist in me often looked for like the biggest, baddest job I could find. And so it makes sense now. Again, I can look back and say, oh, these were the steps I took. But generally, I started my career in the nonprofit sector. Again, very mission-oriented, impact-driven. I reached a point where I started to struggle to figure out where I could go next and felt like graduate school could help open up opportunities to me. So I went to business school. Business school in many ways is a 2-year job search, right? So I spent a lot of time thinking about my next step. But even then, once I left business school, the job I landed afterwards was in a totally different field, a totally different context from, in innovation and design and consulting. From there, I went very kind of randomly into the federal government and worked in innovation inside federal agencies. I went into the private sector after that. I got laid off. And in many ways, that was kind of the real reckoning of, wait a minute, where am I going? And how do all of these pieces fit together? Feeling like I'd been experimenting in many ways for a very long time across industries and sectors and contexts. And I'd picked up all of these tools and all of these experiences and really was forced to figure out, well, how do they all fit? And that's been really the bulk of the work that I've done over the past 8 years with Wayfinders Collective and now with Life Design School. It's really about, again, staying true to, I want to do work that feels aligned with my purpose. I want to do work that's mission and impact oriented. And also, I happen to know how to help people use innovation to design what's happening in their lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's work or another aspect of life. And so again, it all makes sense now. I can wrap my arms around everything. But boy, for a very long time, I thought, what the heck am I doing?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that because it makes me think of my interview with the psychologist and researcher Jonathan Adler on the podcast. And he talks about the concept of narrative psychology. And his whole interview was about how these pivots, sometimes they're hard. A layoff can be tough on the ego, tough on the soul, And the moment you live an event like this, it's very negative. But then a year goes by, 2, 5, and then you can look back and say, you know what? Actually, that layoff was kind of the moment where I opened myself to new perspectives, or that I actually pushed my networking further than I had before. And it was actually instrumental in getting to where I am today. He talks about how the terms he uses is when we think an event in our life is bad, it's called a contamination event. And then when it's positive, or when we are able to look back and actually see the positive in it, it's a redemption event. And what you're saying is exactly, I heard this he was actually on one of my favorite podcasts, Hidden Brain, talking about this. And then I invited him and I was lucky to get him on the show. And I was like, oh, wow, redemption from contamination, and time is actually the factor that allows us to kind of transmute one into the other. And it's also, linear careers, I think today are super, super rare. They used to be very common. And so embracing this kind of a little bit chaotic, unpredictable way of navigating, I think can make us less anxious and just more creative and feel more in control, even though we're not controlling the bearing of the ship exactly, but we're controlling other things. And we're also controlling our emotions. But anyway, I love that you mentioned that about yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting your point about how it takes time.
Yeah.
I think of it almost like we have to metabolize the experience.
Yeah.
Like we have to digest what's happened. And I will say, I completely agree. Some of that it takes a while. Like it takes a period of time for you to be able to have that hindsight and say, like, what is the story, the meaning I'm going to make about this difficult moment or even this success that I've achieved? I will say, what comes to mind, I'm getting the sense, given, the work that you do, it's probably welcome to suggest a book for people to check out.
Definitely.
So when I got laid off, I did a lot of walking. I just pounding the pavement. Just how am I going to make sense of this? And I remember particularly feeling like, how am I ever going to explain to anyone what's just happened? It was a huge blow to my ego, right? I mean, I worked in the Obama administration. I worked in the White House, right? And then I went to the private sector and I was in my job for less than a year and I got laid off from like a high to a very low. And so it was really hard for me to understand the meaning I was going to make about this event. So I went walking a lot and I listened to a lot of podcasts actually, because it was just like, I need some inspiration. I need some ideas. I carried a small notebook with me and I would literally, like every block, I would stop and grab my pencil and write something, like a quote or just a question. And I heard an interview with an author named Nilofer Merchant, who is out of Silicon Valley. She's an incredible innovator and disruptor in many ways. And she had just written a book called The Power of Onlyness. Have you heard of it before?
No.
Okay, so this is the one. Everyone has that book that they just say that, and the right time, the right point in my life, and it just made an impact. So The Power of Onlyness is that book for me. And Nilofer talks about, it's really about how ideas become movements. And that's really powerful and interesting. But the first, maybe third of the book introduces this concept of onlyness that Nilofer defines as each person's unique combination of history, experiences, vision, and dreams. And what she says is that because each of us contains our own onlyness, we will each bring our ideas into the world differently because of the spot that only each of us stands in. And so, for example, David, if you and I had the exact same idea for a new business, Nilofer's theory around onlyness is that we would each bring that idea into being differently because of our unique, again, history, experience, vision, and dreams. And what I loved about that concept, particularly when I got laid off, was first, there's this sense, and I bet a lot of people coming out of graduate school or thinking about where they're going next, there's this sense of this like competition, right? Like there are not enough spots to go around, whatever those spots might be. And I don't want to discredit that. There is some actual scarcity in some of these contexts, right? But what I loved about onlyness was first this idea that like two people can have the same idea and they each get to bring it into the world and they will do it differently because of who they are, right? And that just felt like, wait a minute, you're telling me there's enough oxygen to go around? Like just because I have an idea or you have an idea doesn't mean that like I can't work on something just because you're working on it already, right? And that was really an opener for me.
I just wanted to leave you a little personal message. You may have noticed that last week there was no episode of the show. Well, right now I am trying to walk my own talk and applying all that I've shared with you throughout these years of Papa PhD on my own job search. So I'm still here, I'm documenting my own job search process so I can eventually share what I learn with you. In the meantime, you can reach out and support the show on patreon.com/papaphd or on buymeacoffee.com/papaphd. Any little help will contribute immensely to keeping the Papa PhD mission alive. Thank you for being a fan.
The other reason it really landed was because for me, I was having a really hard time, again, metabolizing this event and trying to understand how do I claim it as a part of my story and recognizing that in my onlyness, part of it is built around this experience getting laid off. And that's not something to hide. It's not something to deny. It actually is part of how I'm going to move through the world and bring my ideas forward in a way that no one else will. Mm-hmm. And so it really, in some ways, it started to feel like my unique competitive advantage.
Sure.
So I just offer that book because it's a great one for anyone in transition. and just considering like, what is your onlyness, the spot that only you stand in, and how can you leverage that to really differentiate yourself and chart your own path?
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I'll put it in the show notes for sure. I'll actually try to get it for myself, either on my
It's a great
Kindle or on paper. But yeah, it makes sense. Actually, so the population we're talking about, the audience we're talking about, graduate students or masters or PhD graduates. Well, first, if they're in graduate school, the scarcity is there. In 5 people who get into graduate school for a PhD will have a spot as a tenure track professor in the end. So scarcity is real on that side of things. And then what happens at the end is once you figure out, okay, actually either this is not going to materialize, and sometimes this happens after 2 postdocs and people try to become a professor and don't get it, and then they see that it's not going to happen or time is ticking and they need to move on. What happens is this kind of identity crisis, right? Like you said, you're on this high and all of a sudden there's a big low, there's a big ravine. In this case, is you get the PhD, the highest degree you can get academically, but you don't have any network outside academia. So even though scarcity may vary for you because you don't have a network, because you didn't get ready, it feels like there's nothing for you out there. Of course, we're going to talk about it, and this is actually not true, but there's some work to be done before that, and I'll for sure going to talk about it. But yeah, people are having very difficult weeks, months of learning in the learning curve of how to apply, receiving a bunch of no's before you get a yes, and not taking it personally. Trying to learn from them as much as possible, get intel if you can. So yeah, there's really this thing of, oh, I got my PhD, and then you fall into this moment of, okay, now I have this degree, and what is it doing for me? Or and the most tragic version that I hear sometimes is, did I make the wrong choice by doing this degree? I just lost 5 years of my life, and yeah, you hear it, right? And anyway, so thanks again for sharing your journey, and it does parallel that. But yeah, maybe you want to react on some of what I just shared, because I see that it's resonating with you.
It absolutely is. It's resonating across many dimensions. I mean, I remember when I graduated from business school and was one of only a handful of people who didn't have a job lined up. And I spent 10 months after business school looking for a job. So it resonates on that dimension. It resonates, this idea of like, what has it all been for? Have I just been wasting my time? I certainly felt that way after I got laid off. And like I had, just like you said, I've built something and now it's all like kind of in dust in my hands. And then certainly now as a coach, I hear very often from my clients or even people who are curious about coaching, they feel like they have either wasted time and are feeling a lot of regret and even shame around that, or they're worried that they are in the process of wasting, whether it's wasting their time, wasting their potential. Like, I know I can do so much more, and I just don't know where to channel it. So it definitely resonates. And I think the through line for me is, and I kind of hate that I'm going to say this because as a recovering perfectionist, this is something that still makes me squeamish, but I now 100% believe in it. I really don't believe that any experience, any choice, any decision, anything is wasted. I do not believe. And I think, so let's just name it. There's like, have I just wasted the last 5 years is very close in terms of sentiment to, am I a failure?
Oh, yeah.
It's not a big jump, right? From
not at all.
Did I make the wrong choice, right? Like, have I failed at this? And I think it's really important to name that when you treat maybe an experience, even a mistake, right, as a failure, it gets us back to like a contamination event, right? There's kind of nowhere to go from there. When you can shift your perspective and see that any mistake even is an opportunity to learn and get smarter, then it all is cumulative. Then it all works in service of what's next. So, I went to business school in large part because my best friend went to business school and she was really smart. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm doing, so I should go to business school too. Like, I had no idea how much math I would have to do in business school. Right. So there were many times as a grad student where I was like, what the heck have I signed up to do? Like, why am I here? And there have been many times even since then where I've said, why did I bother with that? Like, what? I'm not an accountant. I'm not working in finance. Like, why did I feel the need to do this? And okay, in hindsight, I might choose to do something different, right? Again, hindsight's 2020. And also, it was a very big part of making me who I am today and informing how I run my business, for example, how I think about the world and my place in it. It helps me understand my context better. So in some ways, I might have treated it like a failure. Like, I can't believe I just put all that money and time into doing this thing. And now I'm not, working as a big consultant or something like that. And also, how helpful is that? It's really not. So I would really encourage people to just check in with themselves. Like, are you looking at this choice or your scenario through the lens of failure? Because if you are, it's not necessarily good or bad, but I think we can maybe offer that it's not the most creative or generative place to be.
Yeah.
Right. And if you can instead shift your perspective to say, what have I learned from this? What am I taking from this scenario or situation? And how can I apply it to make smarter choices next time? Right. It certainly is a more optimistic place to start from.
Yeah. And you want to be in an optimistic mood when you are redesigning your path. If it's all doom and gloom, you're probably not going to be at your best, because there's some creativity to re-understanding what the next steps are when you thought you were on a path to a certain place and you see it kind of disappear in the mist, and now you're somewhere else. Yeah, and there's a lot of shame out there, a lot of failure. If you're very self-motivated because, I don't know, you didn't publish in the best, you think, oh, I'm not as good as I thought, so I wasn't able to publish in this and that journal. And some people actually have stellar publishing tracks and can't get the professorship in the end. I met someone not so long ago. So nothing is a guarantee of an outcome in this career journey. Other ways or paths to shame or feelings of failure is thinking or feeling like you're failing someone, parents, mentors, etc. And that's very much out there. And a lot of us, especially, let's say, in my domain, a PhD in life sciences, you kind of have an admiration for your mentor, for your PI, and it feels like a double burden. You're failing, between brackets, for not following in their path, and also you're failing them personally if you have that type of relationship. So it can be tough. Now, I wonder whether we can kind of share a path to kind of redemption from this, or a path to acknowledge that sadness, acknowledge that outcome that's not the one that we wanted, but find a space of, like you said, optimism that leads to creativity, that leads to also putting your best foot forward when you're going to meet someone, trying to be in an informational interview, like you said, for example. What are ways that you bring people to this better space when they're in that other one that we mentioned that we don't want to be in?
Yeah. So a couple of things come to mind. And actually, I'll start with a conversation I was just having with my 12-year-old son the other day. Because, boy, I mean, parenting is a chance to try all of these tools and tips and tricks, right?
Yep.
So we were talking about the image of a boat, like a sailboat with a hole in it. Right. And when the boat has a hole in it, you can use a bucket to kind of like chuck water over the side. Right. But we know that's not sustainable. And ultimately, more water will rush in and the boat will sink. So we started talking about ways to patch boat or for a person to patch their boat. And there are all sorts of ways that we can patch our boats in ways that are productive and healthy and helpful. Because I really think, again, to extend the boat idea, you're going to struggle to be creative and generative with new ideas and even new energy if all you're doing is chucking water over the side continuously. Everything from sleep and water and movement and sunlight, the basic healthy building blocks are always available to us and are important to practice every day. The one advice that I received actually when I was before I got laid off, when I was working in government, I was looking to work with a coach because I knew that I wanted to more intentionally and authentically design my next step, but I didn't know what that meant or how to get started. I remember meeting with one potential coach who said, I'd been working on my job search and what's my next job be? I'd been working on it for a very long time. She said, Ashley, you are never going to solve this problem creatively or differently if your creative well has run dry, right? You're not going to infuse this with the energy and the optimism that you want if you are running on empty. And she didn't necessarily say burned out. She just gave me that image of a well that's run dry. So the homework she gave me, and I resisted it. I'll be honest, David, I resisted it. But the homework she gave me was to make a list of 20 things that bring me joy or that brought me joy. She said, Ashley, make this list, and I want you to commit to doing 2 to 3 of them every week for the next 4 weeks. And I want you, importantly, to take your job problem, in air quotes, and put it off to the side. And trust that in 4 weeks, it will still be there. It'll still be asking for your attention. But for the next 4 weeks, just put it down and focus on what brings you joy. So I'm a great student. I love homework. So I was like, okay, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to try. And I swear I sat down with my pen and paper and I felt like such a failure because I could only come up with 11 things, like, oh my God, my life is so joyless that I can't even come up with 20 things. But I started with 11. And they were everything from going to a yoga class to making myself, a frothy latte at home to sitting outside on my porch, right? Like big things, small things, whatever it was. I think I would say bonus points for small things because we want to be able to integrate a couple of them every week, right? Sitting on a beach in the Caribbean brings me joy, but not as easy to implement, right? So I started with a couple of things and I just consistently did those things every week for 4 weeks. And what I found was I was in a completely different headspace and probably heart space, if you will, by the end of those 4 weeks.
Okay.
Now that didn't solve my job problem, right? Because I had put it off to the side. But by pouring into myself and reconnecting to things that brought me enjoyment. And, joy is an interesting emotion. Some people feel like they get it and they're immediately like they have it as a North Star. If that doesn't resonate, I would say things that feel playful, things that feel fun, where you might laugh, where you might make something with your hands, right? Kind of bring color and energy and a client recently used the word zest, like what would bring some zest into your life? And ideally, it has nothing to do with the problem you're trying to solve, right? Because you want to fill yourself up. And once you've done that, then you really can look at this problem with fresh eyes and get to work resolving it.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And it aligns very well with the issue that I mentioned before of we especially when we take on, getting a degree, maybe, MBA, PhD, whatever, that is tough, competitive, etc. Takes a lot of time. It's easy and frequent that we end up over-identifying with it. And I think it disconnects nicely with your 4 steps. And I think anyway, tell me if I'm, a little bit off, but it feels like what you're telling me covers the first 2. Discover who you are and define what matters to you. Because the thing is, I myself, once I got my PhD and or turned in my thesis and then looked for work, even for a few years after, and even today, if I think about it, it's still a little, I can have some questioning about it. Am I still a scientist if I'm no longer at the lab? And if this becomes too big of an idea in your day to day, then kind of takes the space of all these things, personal traits connected to joy, connected to fun, connected to being energized. They're kind of eaten by this monster of regret, let's say. So
yeah, wow.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to let you maybe connect it to your 4 steps because I think it's important to talk about them. But you were talking, I was like, okay, this is the beginning of yes, keeping it there, like you said, it's there. I was in a lab. I would say if you're listening and watching, you're still a scientist. You can be a scientist doing many different things in society. It doesn't have to be in the lab, but we can keep that for another conversation. But you can, please let me know what this elicits in you and how you think people can go through these steps to then not only put that regret or that identity that they feel that they're having to grieve, put it on the back seat, and then, kind of drive towards something. Maybe, I don't know if you like this metaphor too much.
I do like it. I'm always up for a road trip. Absolutely. I mean, first, I just want to say, if you identify with the identity of a scientist, you are always a scientist. No one can take that away from you, right? And I would offer that anyone listening, regardless of your field of study, you have studied this. You have devoted your time and attention and focus to this, and no one can take that away from you, even if you're not a practicing scientist right now. So I want to just kind of tip that in. But you're absolutely right that what we're talking about today very much connects to what I call the 4 steps of life design. And the first 2 in particular, I think you're right, David, you're onto something. So I'll just walk through them really briefly, and then maybe we can even explore an example for for everyone's benefit. So the first step is what I call discover. And discover kind of has 2 parts to it. And I think this is maybe, I don't know, I might guess it may be the most applicable one to anyone who's feeling like I've just invested all this time and energy into a graduate program and I'm not sure like what I'm going to do next, and I'm feeling stuck and maybe like it's been a waste. So discover, again, 2 parts. The first part is discovering or maybe even rediscovering who we are today. Now, that sounds like a really big undertaking for some folks, but really what it is, we were talking about stories and the stories we tell ourselves. It's really an invitation to update the story that you have in your mind about who you are at this point in your life, right? The person, the Ashley that decided to go to business school and concentrate in marketing and sustainability is not necessarily the person that I am today. She's still in there, right? But I have an updated understanding of who I am. And a lot of times, especially for ambitious academics or other, professionals in other kind of high achieving fields, we hold on to this initial identity and we don't often pause long enough to honestly consider, who am I today?
Yeah.
Right. And that can look like, how do I spend my time? What energizes me? What drains me? But really that personal reflection and introspection. So that's one part of discover. But to the point about, I keep hearing in my head this idea of zooming out. If you feel so attached to your identity as an academic or as a scientist, discover is an opportunity to zoom out and see more broadly the context that you sit within. And by that, I mean not just the job market, for example, but if you're excited about technology, are you open and learning and gathering inspiration around what's going on in technology? If you are excited about international development, just pulling another topic out of the top of my head, are you really tapped into what's happening in the world? Certainly what's challenging right now, but who's doing it well? What are the innovations that are happening? Discover is really an open-ended, divergent exercise to expand your field of view. And then once you've done that, the second step, as you said, is to define. And again, this is very much defining from where you sit at this point in your life. So that's asking and answering questions like, what are my priorities? What are my values? What does success look like at this stage or for my next chapter? Even what are my constraints? Because especially for people in academia who are also adults, we have real constraint mid-career we're working on or under. Define is actually a narrowing, it's a focusing, it's really bottom lining, like what matters to me right now. And then interestingly, once you know what matters to you, the third step is to imagine. And again, it's a divergent, broadening. If I could wave my magic wand, what would my ideal future look like? Often we think imagination is the kind of thing for 5-year-olds on the playground, but we as adults need to be tapping into our dreaming, our visioning, our brainstorming. We need to know what future we're working towards. It's so important. And then finally, once we have that, we iterate. That's the fourth step. Iterate really means we take a big vision and we chunk it down into small, incremental, bite-sized steps, bite-sized actions that we can take every single day to move ourselves forward. So rather than ripping off the Band-Aid and quitting your job on a Tuesday afternoon, we think about, where am I going? What's that vision? Now that I know what's important to me, and now that I know who I am at this stage in my life, what are the small baby steps I can take consistently so that I'm moving myself forward, I'm building momentum and confidence, I'm learning as I go, and I'm ultimately following through on my goals. So those are the 4 steps.
Yeah. I really appreciate that you have this as a kind of a first 4 steps is a great small number, so it's not too complex. But that you have it as a system, because it can help people, maybe they already have some introspection, but they haven't started, having like kind of a vision board or something to imagine. And the iteration, that's very interesting to me. And we're getting to kind of the end part of the interview, and I'd love to, and you proposed maybe talking about an example, but I wonder, I'm just thinking, should we go, maybe we'll go to the example, because I have a kind of, oh my gosh, what's the term in English? Kind of a pet idea about what's important. And pet was the one that I found. There's better words there, and somehow they're not coming. But that I'm going to let you go maybe into an example of maybe someone either fictitious or anonymized, but that you've seen and that kind of can connect with my audience. And then I'll see whether I'll test you with my idea, because it's something you haven't mentioned yet, but I'm pretty sure in the story it'll be there. So are you okay with that plan for the next 5 to 10 minutes? Okay.
Yes, that sounds great. Yeah. So let's see an example of how we might iterate.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's what, it's an idea it's no one has really talked to me about this way, like cutting things into small chunks, etc. in this context. So I'd love to maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of examples come to mind, and admittedly, I will use myself as the first example.
That's perfect.
So as I mentioned, I went to business school in part because my very smart best friend had decided to go to business school. I also had an inkling that, I'd been working in the nonprofit sector, and I was the first director of development for this tiny nonprofit. We had really international expansion goals. And at the same time, we were having trouble paying for a new toaster for the office kitchen. So I felt this real tension around, like, how is this all working? And I think that's where really the idea and kind of the catalyst for me going to business school, where it started. Now, I did not investigate that idea at all. It was like, maybe business school would be good for me, and my friend is doing it, so yeah, I'll go to business school. I truly, like I said, had no idea how much math I was about to do. So I basically did what I would now never advise anyone to do, which was to throw myself into GMAT practice, take the exam over and over and over again, spend all this money on applications. In the end, I only got into one school, and I'm very proud. I went to Boston University, but I spent all this time applying. I only got into one school, and boy, did I think, what have I just spent all this time on? But at the same time, I was super committed. I told people I was going to business school, so we're following through. I moved completely across the country to be able to go to business school. Like, I committed. That is not iteration. Okay. Let's be really clear.
Yeah.
So if I could go back and give my former self some advice, I would first start with a couple of things. So the question I always love to invite people to think about is, knowing the big idea that you have, what is the smallest, fastest, cheapest thing that you could do or try right now to learn the most? Just to learn, like, is this directionally an interesting path? So, for example, one thing I could have done is gone to the library and checked out a book, something along the lines of like an MBA for Dummies book, right? I don't even have to go to the bookstore. I could go to the library and check out a book for free that would give me a bit of an overview of what an MBA curriculum is all about. David, if I had done that, I can almost guarantee that my bank account would look really different right about now. Okay. Yeah. But let's just imagine that I open that book and I'm like, yes, this sounds exactly like what I want to do. Right. Okay. So then the question, what's the next smallest, fastest, cheapest thing I could do? Right. Well, I could probably call up my best friend and say, hey, what's business school like? Because she was already a student at the time. What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Okay, I've had that conversation. What did I learn? Let's say I really like it. I'm like, this sounds great. What's the next smallest, fastest, cheapest thing I do? Maybe I decide.
Before you go to the next one, I want to say, I wish I had a buzzer, because my pet thing.
Yes.
My pet thing is, when you mentioned it, talk to people you know. So
okay.
I didn't have to.
Thank you.
Yeah,
you're right.
Anyway,
network.
I let you go.
Yes.
I just wanted to say, awesome, you did it. And anyway, we can then reflect upon it. But the next one. Jen.
Yes. Well, so just another example of what you could do next might be to enroll in an evening course, to just try out some of the content and see if, for example, in my case, if business school was right. So that's what I would really encourage people to do, is just think about, how can I take this big idea and chunk it down and get started? Yeah.
This also means that if you're iterating and then you see that, okay, this is actually not the path, then you pivot to something else.
Absolutely. And you haven't failed. You've learned along the way.
That's it. Without expending too much of your energy and money. And then you can better, it's a way to better make use of all of these resources. No, this totally makes sense. So actually, you had mentioned it before. You had talked about informational interviews, and you also mentioned looking for a coach. Did you end up taking that coaching or finding that?
Did end up working with a coach, a different one than the one who gave me
Okay.
that homework assignment.
Okay.
But working with a coach is an excellent way to move yourself forward if you're feeling stuck.
Yeah. So because very often when we come out of these degrees, you're trained to feel or to act very independent. And it's not that we're not good team workers, but the first reflex often is to depend on ourselves and a little bit like you mentioned, like, I'm gonna figure out the job market by researching. I'll get myself in front of my computer screen and find out all I want. You can get up to a certain point that way. You can tailor the most beautiful resume and cover letter, but if you don't talk to people, and what you did was exactly that, you called your colleague. Oh, you could have. You didn't do it. You said that you should have, or you could have called her and get a better feel of what the terrain was, and then that would have informed you to maybe do something else or find another path. And so the human aspect of it, meaning the more than human, the social aspect of it. There's no better way to get all of this information that you mentioned condensed than in one conversation with another human, and to have real, because also the job market is changing every day and fast these days. So the best way to have true and current information is actually to reach out to people who are already there. So I'm grateful for you to mentioning it. I should have a soundboard with sound effects to have a kind of bells and whistles, but so iteration as a mode of exploration, but also from what I understand, of resource management. Resource, I mean your energy, your money, your time.
Yeah.
I love it.
I love that, actually. I haven't thought about it that way, but it is definitely a sustainable way of making change.
There you go. That's the right term. Yeah, sure. So we are now reaching the end of the interview, and I wonder whether there's another story, because I want people to know how to reach out to you, but I wonder whether for the end of the interview you have a story of a career journey that you want to share, or if you have maybe just a couple of inspiration calls to action that you want to share. How would you like to end this conversation?
Maybe with some overarching guidance, perhaps.
Okay.
And then certainly I'm happy to share a resource that that's free that I would love for people to make use of.
So before we share that, and this way we're teasing a little bit, let people know if they want to reach out to you, if your story resonates with them, if they want to find out about your projects, Wayfinders Collective, but also what's the other
Life Design School.
Life Design is the one that was missing. Yeah, please share where and how is the best way to find out about you and your projects, Ashley.
Yeah, I would love to be in touch with your listeners, David. I'm active on LinkedIn for sure, so you can find me at Ashley Jablow, as well as on Instagram. And for anyone who'd like to check out Life Design School, you can go to lifedesignschool.co. And there's a whole bunch of information about tools and on-demand resources you can try out, as well as coaching with me.
Great. And I'll put all of those informations and links in the show notes of the episode. You can find them there. So Ashley, now to close our interview, I'll let you share that more overarching advice and that tool that you said you were going to mention. And thank you already for all the great insights that you've shared and for being so generous on your story. It's very important, I think, for people to be able to say, okay, this person is now in this position and has this level of accomplishment and fulfillment in their careers, and somehow their journey looks like mine. Okay, maybe I can imagine this for myself too. So thank you for that already. I'll let you then tell a little last words of inspiration, let's say, for the audience.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And I think, what is that expression? We are all works of art and works in progress, right? So yes, I'm happy to be an example that everything can be figured out, right? And that over time we evolve and grow into that authentic expression of who we are. And I'm still working on it. We all are.
Yeah, me too.
We all are. So the thing that I guess I would love to leave people with, and it speaks to this idea of iteration, actually. When I was a kid, my mom, and admittedly still now, even my mom will tell me, Ashley, you have to get on the bus. You can always change your seat later. And I think that often, particularly for high achievers, for ambitious folks who've committed to a career path, it can be really hard to, well, first of all, recognize that we might be on the wrong bus, right? Or that we might want to be on a different bus. But then when we're stuck and not moving forward, there's so much pressure to make sure you get on the quote unquote right bus, right? And actually, what we need to do is get into motion. So, to extend the metaphor, you can get on a bus and then realize, actually, I need to make a transfer, right? Or you can choose a seat and say, I want to sit on the other side of the bus, right? Everything can be changed. Everything, can be updated. And at a certain point, you got to get on the bus if you want to get yourself unstuck. So one of the ways that I would encourage people to get on the bus and to get started, I have a free on-demand workshop that I've created called the Clarity Kit. And it's a 30-minute on-demand video where I walk you through these 4 steps of life design. And we actually do an activity together that's helping you get unstuck and helping you get more clear around the problem you're trying to solve. Because sometimes even just clarifying, it's not just that I'm unhappy, it's that I'm not feeling challenged at work, for example. So getting that clarity around where you're feeling stuck is a great example of getting on the bus.
Yeah.
And then once you're on that bus, you'll be able to say, oh, I like the view over there. I want to go there next, right?
Yes.
So that's also at lifedesignschool.co, right on the homepage. It's called the Clarity Kit. And I would love for people to check it out.
Wonderful. Do check it out if you're listening. I'll also put the specific link to that in the show notes. Ashley, this has been really, really a pleasant conversation. I feel that we were meant to meet and talk because there's great energy, I feel, between us. And I do appreciate the energy that yourself are putting in helping people dealing with this type of transition that is not always easy. And so thank you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been great having you on Beyond the Thesis.
Oh, what a treat. Thank you, David.
Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD is produced by me, David Mendez. If you enjoy the show and want more of my work, please support the show on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/Papa PhD and choose a tier. And if you just want to buy me a coffee, you can easily do it at buymeacoffee.com/Papa PhD. I'm David Mendez. See you soon.